Hey everybody, thanks for dropping by. I just wanted to give a little bit of a report on my experience at the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship General Assembly in St. Louis. And the best part about the experience was being able to go there and make the trip to the Show Me State with my daughter, Callie. My family and I lived 12 years in Missouri, in the southwest part of the state, in the Ozarks area. But St. Louis and Kansas City are the two largest cities in the state, and we would enjoy going and taking some road trips there. And just to be able to make the trip back to St. Louis was really something. I have to say, I was a little bit on the fence about making the trip until it was made known that part of the experience would be a night at the ballpark at Busch Stadium, and more about that in a moment. But the venue for the event was a Hyatt Regency Hotel, which was literally a few steps away from the Gateway Arch National Park, and then the Mississippi River is right there too. If you've never been to the Gateway Arch, St. Louis is a destination place. It is a phenomenal architectural wonder, and is free admission. You can pay to go up in the arch. That's something I did about 10 years ago. Callie and I did not do it this time. The triple-digit temperatures kind of discouraged us from making the trip up into the arch. But it's a beautiful venue, and the assembly was underneath, literally underneath the arch, and that was really part of the theme of the event. And what I wanted to do, and I try to do this because I was grateful to represent our church and grateful our church is part of the fellowship, I try to give a little bit of a report to our people to let them know some of the things that took place, and I wanted to use this venue to make that happen. And plus, in the off chance there might be some of you who would be interested to get my thoughts about it or just to review. I won't go into all the particulars, but I did want to point out some of the high points. On Tuesday, there was a leadership event that was led by Dr. Ryan Burge, and Ryan is the Associate Professor of Political Science at Eastern Illinois University, and I understand he's going to Washington University in August. Ryan is known as the numbers and graphs guru, I guess, for lack of a better term. He served as a bivocational pastor for 17 years and until his church eventually closed, and he wrote about this, really a good article. I think I found this in Sojourners magazine, but he talked about his own experiences in the local church, about a church that was aging and the declining numbers and the financial challenges. And I wasn't able to be in the room for this event. I did not register in advance for that time together, but I was able to get a lot of the material. Having not registered for it, I did use that time, plus a lot of the other time, in sermon preparation, and got to know the Starbucks there in the hotel really well. But anyway, some of Ryan's thoughts really resonated and validated my own thinking, in that there is a tendency to romanticize the past and talk about how much better things were back in the day. Again, Ryan is a political scientist, and he's very familiar with these numbers. And he says the numbers in the past don't support that mindset. He says, we were never as pious as you were led to believe. It's just that we get nostalgic and grind off the parts we don't like. We have a distorted view of the past. And I want to thank Baptist News Global and CBF for their information about the conference and making that possible and available for us. There wasn't a lot that I read about what Ryan had said that surprised me. I had been familiar with some of his other work, especially about the rise of the nuns and the duns. He says that location plays a role in the growth, the numerical growth of a church. And when the growth in the county goes up, that can impact the church's growth. And of course, when the growth in the county goes down, that's also going to impact the decline in the church. Which leads me to this statement that's pretty obvious, but is worth noting. He says, if your church isn't growing, it's not all your fault. If your church is growing, it's not all you're doing. And he said a couple of final thoughts about this. God has called you to be faithful, not successful. God sees you, God honors you, and nothing has changed my life more than turning my heart towards gratitude and thanksgiving. There's an old adage that says facts are stubborn things, and the tendency is to focus on just the quantitative aspect of church life and church growth, but we need to recognize that the gospel is about changing lives, and the work of the church has never been more important. And speaking for myself and talking to others who have been in the ministry for a while, when I started this work, getting in the pastorate, in ministry in general, I aspired to be part of a really large church, but now as I have gotten a little bit older, I've come to realize that the main focus is simply to be faithful in my corner of the vineyard, and especially when I read about and hear about all of the moral and ethical failures of church leaders, I just want to finish with my character intact. And really, day after day, I pray, Lord, please just keep me from evil. I thought Ryan's conference seemed to go well, and he offered a lot of great information. On Tuesday afternoon, there was a tri-state gathering of the CBF Alabama, Tennessee, and Georgia. It was more of a dessert fellowship to get the three state groups together and to follow the theme of food. This was really kind of an appetizer for what is yet to come in October. Being part of the leadership team here in Tennessee, we're calling it TAG, T-A-G, Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia. And for the first time that I've been aware of this, we are bringing three state groups together for an annual meeting. We'll gather in Chattanooga. There's some promotion work being done, and I'm hopeful that there'll be some good participation. I would envision each of these state groups maintaining their autonomy and independence, but hopefully we can share some resources and can reach across state lines on different events. There were 2 luncheons. I want to thank Good Faith Media for allowing me to sit at their table for the Dr. Emmanuel McCall Racial Justice Trailblazer Luncheon, and the event honors McCall as an African-American pastor who had a key role in CBF life. And the luncheon draws attention to the need and purpose of racial reconciliation. And a highlight is always the keynote speaker, and this year was Tracy D. Blackman, and she challenged us to remember that annihilation is the way of the world, but reconciliation is the way of God. And she's a theologian in residence at Eden Theological Seminary, and her key passage came from Romans 13. To paraphrase, you know what time it is. It is the moment for you to wake from sleep, for salvation is nearer to us. Now, Romans 13 is one of those few passages, I think there are 3 of them, that the church cites to talk about different relationships we have with the government. And Romans 13 has been used and misused in different ways. It's the one that says to submit to the governing authorities. But we were reminded that it was Paul's intent to tell the church to do what's necessary to survive. And in a similar capacity, that's what the church is trying to do today. We're trying to do what is necessary to fulfill our mission. One of the things that Reverend Blackman said that stuck out at me, she says, if your theology doesn't make you do something, it's not the gospel. And there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation in the world, and the church must stand for truth. The other luncheon that I attended was the Baptist Women in Ministry luncheon. Was able to sit at the Tennessee CBF table. The guest speaker at the luncheon was Angela Dinker. It was really more of a panel discussion about her book, Disciples of White Jesus, The Radicalization of American Boyhood, that was released a few months ago. She's an ordained minister with the Evangelical Lutheran Church, and she gave a lesson and really based her remarks on John chapter 11, and she talked about how Jesus related to the news of Lazarus' death and how he interacted with Mary and Martha and really those in the crowd at that moment. And as a bit of trivia, maybe many of us have memorized the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. Angela referenced this and this moment in Jesus' life as a way of showing evidence about Jesus' showing emotion and his empathy. In her book, and really the remarks that she made, she talked about the importance of combating this alternative narrative around men, which says the only appropriate emotion is anger. The current cultural narrative is one that elevates violence, and Dinker says, for boys and young men growing up in this environment, the only safe emotion you can express is anger. If you're sad, if you're grieving, feeling betrayed, you can be angry, but that's the only acceptable emotion. And she talked about her book, and the purpose of her book is to show a masculinity rooted in the person of Jesus Christ. This is not the militaristic or white Jesus that we hear about, but she attempts to bring us back and her readers back to the Jesus that is in the Gospels. Jesus does not represent wealth or power at all costs, which when you think about it, that would have Jesus giving in to the temptations of Satan in the desert. She also pointed out some statistics that white men are more likely than any other demographic group in the United States to be a mass shooter, and white men are more likely than any other demographic to die by suicide, which I found incredible and tragic. I found her presentation interesting and educational, and especially her acknowledgement and her story of being a mother and a minister and an author. And her remarks validated some of my own thinking but how we tend to make Jesus into our own image and can project that worldview onto others. And I agree that we need to go back to the Jesus of the Gospels and allow that narrative to shape our worldview. There were 2 worship services, and I thought they were very meaningful. Hatfield preached at one of them. She is the pastor of First Baptist Church, Jefferson City. They're in Missouri. She preached on Come to the Waters from Isaiah 55, and she used the Mississippi River as a visual. And she told the story of John Berry and Mary Meacham. And again, this story was so powerful. John was the enslaved son of a Baptist preacher and purchased his freedom at the age of 21 and walked 700 miles to Virginia to free his father, and eventually followed his still enslaved wife and children to St. Louis with just $3 in his pocket. They educated black children in their house until Missouri outlawed black education in 1847, and then John was arrested and their basement school closed. But here's the thing, the state of Missouri owned the land, but the federal government had jurisdiction over the Mississippi River. So John had this vision of, and he followed through on this, he bought a steamboat, he filled it with desks and books, and he anchored it just offshore in the river, creating what newspapers called the Floating Freedom School. I thought this was a great message, and I'd encourage you to listen to it online. And Paul Baxley is the executive coordinator of the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. He preached a message from Ephesians. Jesus Christ is our cornerstone and keystone. He said that Jesus is the first stone, Jesus is the last stone, and in him everything holds together. Just a few thoughts that stuck out at me. He says it's not that when we come to Jesus that our differences disappear. That would be even boring for moderate Baptists. What a God who raises the dead does is desires to resurrect people into a relationship with one another where their differences radiate brightly in the image of God, and they bring all that they have and all that they are to sing praise to Him and live a life in this world that is a foretaste of the world that is to come. And he emphasized that Jesus is the orientation and Jesus is the focus. And he referenced Dietrich Bonhoeffer's book, Life Together, which is a book I've led our own church on a study on in the past, in referencing the importance of Christian community in and through Jesus Christ. One of the things about the General Assembly, there's not a lot of voting on different things. There aren't any resolutions to vote on. There really wasn't anything controversial to speak of, not that I missed any of that. We did vote on a budget, which was a reduction of about 8% of last year's budget. A number of missionaries took early retirement, and that explained the reduction from last year. We did vote on a governing board, missions council, ministries council, and a nominating committee. The high points for me were the recognition of the missions personnel and sending out of the chaplains, and they brought the chaplains on the platform, and they were anointed and given a stole as a way of commissioning. The moderator was Juan Garcia, and in his farewell address, he did this in Spanish, and the English translation was provided on the screens. And in his remarks, he focused on the Baptist principle of dissent against injustice. One of his key statements was dissent against any ideology that seeks to replace Christ with political power, nationalism, lies, or fear. As Baptists, we must oppose any attempt to co-opt the gospel for political gain or to use the name of Jesus instead of proclaiming him as good news for the oppressed, the poor, and the marginalized. Now, I found his remarks inspiring and timely, and mainly because they brought our attention back to our historical roots. Baptists were once a minority group who fought for the rights of the minority opinion. And it's easy, once you gain position and power and prominence even, that we might forget about our heritage. But to me, this was one of the high points of the assembly. I did attend a breakout session led by Dr. Pam Durso, who's president of Central Baptist Theological Seminary, on cultural competency and congregational leadership. We watched 3 videos on preaching, pastoral care, and hospitality, and the videos are on their website, and they deal with these 3 issues, and they talk about how we relate to them through a social, racial, and ethnic lens, and about the different backgrounds of people that are in the church. And really one of the things that I learned from this is not to stereotype people based on their appearance. And again, I'd recommend going to the Central Baptist Theological Seminary website and watching these videos. Now, I'm doing this particular podcast as a means of reporting to our people about my time in St. Louis. But if you'd like to have more information, there are a number of news sources out there. I've been looking at Baptist News Global and the CBF media for this. And of course, there are others out there who might be less charitable about the event. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to try to give just a few takeaways. The first takeaway was and is I thought going to the Cardinals game was extremely fun and a great idea, even though we lost 8-0 at the hands of the Cubs. And kudos to CBF for scheduling a night at Busch Stadium. It was triple-digit temperatures. We were in right field facing the sun, but we didn't melt. We had a good time. Hundreds of people from CBF came, and again, I don't know offhand the number of people who attended the whole event, but I can appreciate the time we had in the bleachers that night. I knew it was going to be a long night. Before Callie and I even sat down, the first pitch, someone on the Cubs hit it out of the park, so I knew it was going to be a long night. But I do appreciate the fact that there were youth and children's tracks available for parents and to see the kids roaming around the hotel. And that reminded me of when Callie, Lucy, and Matt were small and when we would make the trip to the assembly, how important having this resource was. So I simply want to thank CBF and those in particular who work with the teenagers and the children to provide those experiences for them while their parents could do other things. Another takeaway for me, I appreciated the biblical and theological basis of the event, and I think one of the perceptions of the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, especially from other Baptist entities, is that the CBF doesn't take the Bible seriously, and I found that to be untrue. And have found it to be untrue, especially during those days together. It is safe to say that not everyone has the same interpretation on every issue in Scripture, and there are legitimate places of disagreement. No organization is perfect, and that's true of this one. But generally speaking, CBF seeks to be inclusive and doesn't vote out churches who desire community with them. And I think that means for some people it is too inclusive, and for others it might be too exclusive. But the emphasis is really on fellowship, missions, and sharing Christ through words and actions. And because of this, there are going to be levels of comfort and discomfort with this approach, which leads me to another takeaway, which is the CBF is 35 years old. And as I've noticed, having attended a few of these, it is good to see different age groups participate in leadership. And I think this is encouraging, but it's also a note of caution because, and I think this is natural as we look at history, that there may be those who do not remember or care about some of the denominational battles that CBF went through early on, and those who were part of championing the cause for free and faithful Baptists. But I do hope that we can remember and will continue to highlight the 4 fragile freedoms that Buddy Sheridan put together for us, those freedoms of Bible, soul, church, and religious freedom. They are fragile, and we do need to be Baptists who do affirm those things. One of the key principles as part of this, being part of the CBF, is the emphasis on local church autonomy. Local church autonomy is held at a premium, and that Baptists are a confessional people rather than creedal. The original creed, Jesus Christ is Lord, is the primary source. And again, there are areas of agreement and disagreement as relates to what are primary and tertiary matters, but I think some of that comes to being Baptist. And the final takeaway I will give, I really enjoyed going with my daughter Callie and seeing her involved in different ways and leading in different capacities through her own organization. It was good to reconnect with a number of friends, and I'll avoid mentioning names, but I do hope that I can get several of them on this podcast and have conversations with them about their life and their ministries, because I have found them to be truly inspiring. So I think that's about it for now. The CBF Assembly is in Jacksonville next year. So until next time, thanks for listening.